Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them.
Hello, wonderful weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira, and today's guest is a very special guest. He's the creator of Raised on DnD podcast. He's a game creator. He's a father. He's a professional GM. I'm talking about Nicholas Cardarelli. He has this wonderful podcast, as I talked about, Raised on D&D, which is all about parenthood and playing games and getting kids into gaming. But before I get into that, I would like to remind you to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a review, tell people what you think about the show, what is good, what is bad, what it can be improved, and support the show sharing links to your friends, to your gaming group, in your social media. And if you have any coins left from your last adventure where you defeated dragons or you just made a heist or whatever, look out the show notes where you can pay us a coffee at ko-fi.com/WG and WP, or get one of my games, or use the link on TTRPGs to buy anything you want, and we got a little bit small cut to help pay the bills of the podcast and whatever. And getting back to the subject of the podcast today, which is Nicholas. We talked about his history with RPG, with D&D. We talked about the Satanic Panic. We talked about parenthood a lot because it's something that is very important to both me and him. We talk about playing games with kids, what is good, what is bad, what it works. We talk about the appreciation for the weird and the unusual. We talk about games, very different kind of games. We talk about paranoia, about creativity, about imagination, about comedy. We talk about having very weird experiences. Nicholas has a lot of stories to tell, and he talks a little bit about this, talk about the religion background and how that affects his reality. It was a really inspired chat. Nicholas has a lot to share with us, a lot of wisdom, so I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So let's get weird with Nicholas Cardarelli. Hi Nicholas, hi Nick, welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. It's so good to have you here. I've been on your show for a couple of times, and it's great to have you here to talk about gaming, talk about being weird, talk about all the stuff that we love. How are you, my friend?
I am doing fantastic. Diego, it's such an honor to be on your show today. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. You've been doing great things with Raised on D&D, and I wanted to talk to you about this. I'm a parent too, so this gaming and kids and being raised with it, and you know, it's something very dear to me. So I want to, first of all, for the wonderful weirdos out there who might not know who you are, what is that you do, can you tell us with your own words instead of me, just reading a bio, who is Nick Cardarelli? Sorry if I'm butchering your name.
No, that's perfect.
And what is that you do? And if you can, share just a small, maybe a weird detail about yourself or the way you do things differently.
Sure. Hi everybody. I'm Nick Cardarelli. I am the host of Raised on D&D podcast. It's a podcast about tabletop role-playing games and family. And I am also a game designer and a professional dungeon master, where I am paid to run tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons online for people all over the world. And as far as a weird thing about me, I grew up in the 80s, and I consumed not only a lot of fantasy and science fiction books, but also a lot of fantasy and science fiction movies and TV shows and media, comic books. And I take inspiration from all of those things when I'm creating tabletop games and adventures for my players.
Awesome. And talking about your podcast, and you sort of talked about being a professional GM, but you mentioned being a game designer too and a creator. Can you tell us a little bit of the things that you created and published, or you do share on Raised on D&D?
Sure. So one of the my published book on DriveThruRPG is called Summer at Season Serenity, which is a module where a group of adventurers are sent to go find an old mentor, and they quickly find out that they are way out of their league, and they're put in a situation where all the challenges seem to be beyond what they're used to and what they're capable of handling. So it's a very very different kind of D&D experience, because things aren't on an even playing field. Also, I've created a lot of games that I give away for free on the internet. I've created, and the reason they're free is because they have some licensed IPs. So I've written some Star Wars adventures, some Star Trek adventures. I've written some superhero adventures and things like that, and I've given those away.
Is that all for D&D? Or
yes, so
for different games? Okay.
There's some different games. My superhero games are written for Mutants and Masterminds, and both the Star Wars and the Star Trek are written for the Dungeons and Dragons 3rd and 3.5 editions, or the D20 system that we used to call it back in the 90s.
Awesome. And talking about raised on D&D now, Angrobit, were you raised on D&D? Did you grow up playing role-playing games?
So
if you did, who introduced you? How did you get started on this weird hobby that we have?
Sure. So I come from the dark days of, in America, we had the Satanic Panic, which is where people were afraid of their children playing tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons. They thought that it would lead to deviant behavior. So, so I was introduced to tabletop role-playing games in 1989, which is not all the way back to the beginning, but it's pretty close. What had happened was my friends were in a special class at school for the very, very smart kids. They went to a special class, and when they were done with their schoolwork, the school teacher would allow them to play tabletop role-playing games. And the tabletop role-playing game that they got to play in school was called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Weirdness, Other Strangeness, by Palladium Books. And they brought that home to the neighborhood, where they introduced me to it, and we all started playing this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle role-playing game. My brother had a best friend who was a dungeon master of 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, and he offered to run me and my friends on a game because we were having a hard time with the rules and concepts and things like that. And he was probably about, I would say, 6 years older than us. So
how old were you back then?
I'm sorry. I was 12 years old when we started playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so here we are, a group of 12-year-olds, and this like senior in high school, this 17-year-old is running Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition for us for the very first time. And we just get hooked on it. We get hooked on tabletop role-playing games, and then we start playing fairly regularly. And then we start branching out to other games like Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, so on and so forth. And then, of course, 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons comes out. And by then I'm in my early 20s. So I wasn't raised by gamers in the aspect of I had family members that loved it, but 12 years old, which was the norm back in those days of being introduced to tabletop role-playing games. But Raised on D&D is about the fact that I raised my children around the game table, teaching them tabletop role-playing games at a very, very young age. They started, I have three children. They're each about 17 months apart. And I introduced them to role-playing when they were 4, 3, and 2.5, which is very, very young for that particular hobby.
4, 3, and how much? 1.5?
Yes, 4, 3, and 2.5. Yeah. Oh. So I had to use enlarged dice for the smallest one, so he wouldn't choke.
I
and only
used those foam dice. Do you know
Oh, the
the
foam
foam dice?
ones. Yes.
Yeah, I used that ones. Yeah,
And
my kid beat them. Like,
taking bites out of it. Yeah. And
yeah,
and they didn't have, now they have all kinds of games for small children.
true.
Back then I had to take Dungeons and Dragons, and I had to take Pathfinder, and I just kind of had to water it down. And then we started introducing them to kids role playing games and things like that.
How old are they? Are they now? Like, you said you?
So my oldest just turned 18. My middle is about to
Wow.
turn
Yeah.
17, and then I have my youngest is 15. So they've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a very long
Yeah,
time.
that's awesome. Yeah. And do they still play right now? Do they GM? Do they play other games? Do they explore things outside of the things you presented them, or they really just consume the stuff that you consume too in terms of gaming?
So we have as they get older,
Mm-hmm.
their time starts getting consumed by more things, jobs and
Yes,
schoolwork and things like that. They
like
start getting
us.
pulled in different directions.
Yeah.
So we make it a point though to have family game time still. My middle child, my oldest son, loves dungeon mastering. He loves designing his own games, things like that. My youngest loved doing artwork and
Mm.
inspired by our games and his characters and things like that. And my oldest, she really enjoys gathering people together for the game. So she likes the social aspect of the game where she can get her friends together and I can run games for them. In fact, one of the Star Wars adventures that I wrote was specifically because she requested a Star
Nice.
Wars themed birthday party for her and her friends to play tabletop role playing games Star Wars.
That's great. Yeah, I've trying to do the same thing with my kid, but it's very hard to compete with this immediate gratification of this media that's just clicking something and watch, and yeah. How was it in your home? How do they are they very easily drop out of electronic things? It's very immediate to play tabletop. Do they have or just this family nights? How are they with this balance between you know because for them they were born in this digital age and it's very easy to get there, and for us we know like we have to have this balance. And I'm always curious because you have 3 kids and they're older now, and how are they with this? Do you think it's they manage to balance time outside of screens and screens in terms of entertainment and of games?
Well, they definitely can't balance it on their own. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So we probably went, I want to say maybe 4 years, where the only screen time they had was television.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah.
then the tablets started to being introduced. And now, of course, they're young adults and they're teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have cell phones, which take up most of their time. So what we've had to do throughout the years is we've had to take technological breaks from the screens, both for the children, but also for us adults, because
Mm-hmm.
especially with me being on social media with my podcast and gaming
Yeah.
online and things like that, sometimes it's difficult for me to put the screens down. So to
Mm-hmm.
be able to say to them, hey, we need to take a break from the screens, the hard part is you as the parent also have to take a break from the screen, right?
Yeah. Leave the
But
phone another room when you go hang
yes,
out with them. Leave it. Yeah.
and it's very and it can sometimes be very difficult, especially if you have demanding jobs that call you on your days off and things like that.
Yeah.
That can be difficult. But what we do is we set aside specific time, and now that they're older, we'll schedule it with them. We'll say, hey, listen, everybody's off work, everybody's out of school, everybody's not doesn't have an extracurricular activity. on this particular night. So let's plan for game night. And that's kind of how we handle it. When they were younger, it was easy. We said, hey, Friday night's going to be family game night.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to play Minecraft. You're not going to be able to, you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to
Roblox
go
and
on
stuff.
Discord, Roblox,
Yeah.
all those things. We're going to sit down. We're going to game as a family. And it can be difficult, especially when you have multiple children, because you'll have, in my household anyway, you'll have two that are on board and one that's like, I'm not doing that, so it's kind of a juggling act for sure. But balancing the screens and the table time, really, I think just pre-planning, giving them a little advance notice, letting them know, hey, we've been talking about this all week. This Friday for a couple of hours, we're going to game.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I'm having a hard time doing this, especially because the schedule is all over the place. The school is on strike, and it's like, what do you do? Like changing the day job. So I'm having a hard time figuring out how to do this. But I have to maybe schedule sometimes. Yeah. You talked about how you began playing at 12 years old and were presented to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness. And a friend of a brother played D&D. It all seemed very difficult, very strange. And the podcast is called Weird Games and Weirder People. And what I wanted to ask you is how weird was role playing games for you when you started? How did you feel this wonderful weirdness when you began playing?
So for me, tabletop role-playing games felt fun and natural because there was an acting aspect to it, and I had been in community theater and things like that. I had always been a gamer, even from a young age, with card games and board games. Those were kind of the way families spent time together in that time period in the 80s. So it wasn't too much of a leap. But where the weirdness comes in is when we tried to enjoy our hobby in public, when we tried to enjoy our hobby among peers that didn't enjoy tabletop role-playing games or didn't understand them, those kind of things. So what ends up happening is that experience with Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition is the first and last time I would play Dungeons and Dragons for almost a decade. Because at that time we were in the midst of what is now called the Satanic Panic, where people were hostile towards anyone who enjoyed tabletop role-playing games. So my friends and I found out that Palladium Books, who made the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, also created what they called Palladium Fantasy, which was a fantasy setting. It was very similar to Dungeons and Dragons, but because it didn't have the title Dungeons and Dragons on the cover, it allowed us to be able to read those books amongst our peers during this hostile time period, and no one even noticed. And they would say something like, they would say, what is that? Is that Dungeons and Dragons? And we would show them the cover and say, no, this is Palladium.
Of course not. Yeah.
It's nothing like
totally
that.
Different.
Totally different. And for folks who don't know, it was not different at all. But it allowed us to enjoy our hobby without being attacked for being weirdos.
Yeah. But this thing about doing something that's kind of forbidden, it's kind of a secret, and it's kind of very personal, right? You created a community, you created a group of misfits that are doing this forbidden thing, which it's some kind of fun, right? It's exciting in a way, and nowadays we don't have that, right? Nowadays role-playing games is very popular culture, it's very out there, and it's kind of make me wonder, do you feel that's kind of outsider, like in the fringes, like we're hiding? This is special just for. Do you feel this kind of mystical and forbidding aspect of role-playing games?
So back in the day, you're absolutely right. You had to have like the secret handshake. You had to be in the know, that kind of thing. And
like,
but but luckily, I would grow up as the panic started to end, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a resurgence of the panic with White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade, and the
That's
attention
true.
turned from the tabletop player to the live action role player, the LARPer. The LARPer became the
Mm,
dangerous attention that everyone focused on, and then
yeah.
it's okay if you kids play tabletop role playing games as long as you don't LARP. That's the dangerous part, right? So, so thank you, Vampire the Masquerade, for that. Took the heat off the Dungeons and Dragons guys, but yeah, there was an exclusivity. And what was interesting too about that aspect was our table. A lot of people like to think, especially because of popular media, shows like Stranger Things and Freaks and Geeks and things like that. They like to think that only the nerds were playing Dungeons and Dragons. But in the 90s, it was opening up, but it was still secret. And so our table included football players,
Wow.
members of the wrestling team, and then you had the really smart kids, and then we had musicians. So there were all these people, all these folks who really shouldn't be lumped into the same group if they're keeping to their stereotypes. They shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be lumped together, but they're meeting secretly on Friday night,
Yeah.
playing role playing games. And at school, we nodded to each other or waved, and people knew we were friendly, but they had no idea that on the
What
weekends
happened?
we
Yeah.
were heroes going on grand adventures. And so that was part of that elite exclusivity kind of thing. But now that it's popularized, and I think the internet shows like Critical Role is what's pulled back the veil, the
Yeah.
popularization
Yeah, yeah, and
Dungeons and
now
Dragons.
it's back then you would see each other on school and you wave each other, but now it's more popular. It's cool, right? To be role
Yes,
player nowadays,
absolutely.
right?
Oh yeah, it's very cool. And I think people talk about TV shows like Stranger Things brought a lot of attention to Dungeons and Dragons, but I think really the streaming shows like Critical Role, what it did was a lot of people were afraid to try tabletop role playing games because you had to meet at somebody's house on a Friday night in their basement. You weren't sure what they were doing down there, you weren't sure what it all involved. And so there was an intimidation factor for a lot of people. But when
Mm-hmm.
shows like Critical Role, they kind of pulled back the veil and it allowed people to watch other people play Dungeons and Dragons. And when they saw how much fun it was, how enjoyable it was, how funny it can be, uh, that is when people said, you know what, I think I might try this. Um, and now that it's popular, I don't it doesn't bother me at all. I love it. I love getting to play, especially online. I get to play with people from all over the world. There I have had game tables where I have had people from 5 or 6 different countries. I've had game
Yeah.
tables where I've played with people from all over the continent. It's very very cool to go from a small group of friends in a basement
Yeah.
30 years ago to being able to game with people from all over the world. I think it's great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying this is bad right now. Like this is popular. Like we're talking to you. Like we're integrating all parts of the world because of the hobby, making new friends. Uh, it's just as we were talking, I was wondering, wow, yeah, that was kind of there was a mystique involved, and it was kind of fun, Like, oh yeah, oh, do you play? Oh, like you had to know the person before, like you mentioned, did you play because you don't know what they will think about. I even I had a girlfriend that I lost. I didn't have anymore because she found out I played role playing games and that wasn't acceptable. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it was strange times. But it kind of really brought together the people that were playing that was we were like outsiders. So like we just had one another, and yeah, it's things can be good and bad at the same time, right? And everything has to be it's either good or bad. So yeah,
But you're right. You're right. You had to ask like some qualifying questions, like,
yeah,
"Hey, have
yeah.
you read the Lord of the Rings? Oh yeah, yeah. You like that? You like Lord of the Rings? Okay, okay. Have you watched this movie? Have you watched Dragon Slayer 1982? Oh, you did. Oh, okay, all right.
Do you
And
play games like make believe? Yeah,
you ever played some board games?
yeah.
Yeah. You
Very
had to go through
caution.
like
Yeah,
you had to go
yeah,
through like a combination lock of questions to make sure
yeah.
that this person was was down for D&D.
Yeah, or even we were down just accepting that you played D&D because sometimes even
Mhm.
if they don't play, like, oh no, this is weird, like we can't
Oh
hang
yeah.
out or something. Yeah, yeah. And
I, I realized when it was really popularized, when it was socially acceptable in most
mm-hmm.
circles to play Dungeons and Dragons, was just a few years back. I went to a print shop here in town, a place where you make copies and have them print things out, and I was printing out character sheets for an in-person game. I go up to the counter to pay for my copies, and the young lady behind the counter, she must have been like 25, and she says to me, she looks down at these and she goes, "Oh, is this for some kind of game?" And instinctively, from growing up in that time period, I was going to respond
No,
with,
no, 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 no.
"It's for a board game. But please check me out. Here's my money." Right? And
Uh,
I thought to myself, I said, "Wait a second, wait a second. D&D is popular now. It's all over the internet. Everybody knows about it. I'm
yeah,
just going to say it. I'm going to say it loud and I'm going to say it proud." And I said, "Those are character sheets for Dungeons and Dragons." And I'm expecting the girl to gasp or to give me that like silence. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like that shocked silence. And she goes, "Dungeons and Dragons? I always wanted to try that." And it was so shocking to me that she responded in that way versus a "Oh my gosh, weirdo. Okay, well here's your copies. Get
yeah,
out of here," right? And so she did though. She was like, "Oh, I always wanted to try that. How do I do it?" That sort of thing. So,
yeah.
and
I
that
love
was
when that happens. Yeah,
wonderful. Yeah,
uh,
you're just pleasantly surprised, right?
yeah. But our first thing is still to look to the side, like, whoa, I've been discovered. Oh no.
Yes.
Yeah, Nick, one of the name of the podcast is Weird Things and Weird People, and the weird, it's something we always lean on here. And I wanted to ask you, uh, what is weird for you? And do you try to explore the weird in the games that you play and the things you do in your life to have, weird and wonderful experience? Because we have this thing about the weirds and the wonderful, we see weird in a very positive light here. So how is your relationship with the weird, and how do you approach it in your life and your games?
Sure. I think it has a lot to do with the way I grew up. Um, in my household, science fiction was a very influential medium. We watched classic Star Trek, the William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy um, Star Trek episodes that they call the original series,
Mm-hmm.
and um, that kind of as fans of Star Trek know, that really highlights diversity and inclusivity, which was revolutionary not just for the 60s when that show was on the air, but all throughout the 70s and 80s. So my fascination with the weird and the different and the unusual kind of starts there, I think, if I had to pinpoint it. Also in the 80s growing up, children's television was not just afternoon cartoons and Saturday morning cartoons. When we didn't have cartoons, we had nature documentaries. Now, folks of this generation are more used to things like Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, things like that. But we had to have special programs that would show us animals from different countries and different parts of the world, and marine life and things like that. But I think a interest in science and science fiction bled into a appreciation for things that were different, strange, and unusual, and that led to growing up consuming those kind of media. And then you would want an interest in animals and biology leads you to things like cryptics, like Bigfoot and
Mm-hmm.
Loch Ness
Yeah.
monsters and things like that. And chupacabras, right? So those kind of things. So that kind of interest. Well, then you get into tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, and you have all these mythical monsters from Greek mythology and from mythologies from around the world and things like that. So the one of the things that I try to tell folks about tabletop role-playing games, especially parents who want to play with their children, is that it leads to a healthy curiosity. It leads to wanting to know things about history, things about biology, things like that. And so that kind of all rolls into the weirdness. So when you ask me what's weird to me, well, that's kind of a hard question because I've been so saturated in it for most of my life, whether it was weird animals from Australia or it was legendary cryptics or mythological creatures, or
Mm-hmm.
whether it was interesting things that actually happened in history. Those kind of things, they kind of bleed together. And games like Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, that actually brings all of these things almost into a symphony. Brings them all together, and you're able to use all of that knowledge, all that trivia, all that weirdness. You get to use that all together in one place, and it makes for an amazing time.
Yeah. Now that you're talking about all of this, because all fiction, in the end, is inspired by reality.
Mhm.
So all these animals, history events, civilizations, all these strange things in our reality end up inspiring the games that we make, and kind of made me feel how games are really this platform for us to explore reality and the strangeness of reality in kind of a safe way. You obviously, we put some makeup over it to be more palatable, right? So we're not gonna play with real historical events because that can be very sensitive. So we put veneers over it. It's elves. It's this evil army. It's like all those things that I love this phrase about that Neil Gaiman says that we fiction is a way for us to talk about reality and truths. So fiction is a perfect vehicle for dealing with truths through lies, and that's kind of RPGs. Like we're exploring and learning about all these strange things about the world, about ourselves, about how we relate to one another, to a safe space and a fun space. And I love this idea, like exploring the weird out there, and how can we kind of make sense of all this through games. And yeah,
I
RPGs
want
as a medium to explore the world is a very cool concept indeed. Yeah.
it's very good, and you bring up a very good point. Art can imitate life, and life can imitate art. And I think with that, one of the things, the reason that my wife and I, who are both gamers, decided to raise our children on D&D or raise them on tabletop role-playing games was because we recognize the value of these tabletop role playing games. If you any kind of job, um, any kind of training you receive as an adult, you'll see that they use um, scenario based training is very, very powerful. And in different jobs, different careers, they will do scenario based training, and they will say to you, okay, you're in this situation, how do you handle it? Well, that's tabletop role playing games
Yeah.
without the dice, right? So that's basically how it works. Is here's the scenario. this is the situation. Here's the information that you can perceive, right? And then how do you handle it, or how does your character handle it? With that comes all kinds of benefits. With my children being raised in that way, like you mentioned, it's a safe environment. So they were able to explore social aspects of the game, interacting with non-player characters and being able to decide, hey, uh, I'm going to talk rude to the shopkeep. How does the shopkeep respond, and how do they treat me
Yeah.
after being rude to them versus trying to be polite? Or I'm going to try and intimidate versus trying to negotiate, right? And this was incredibly helpful for my children. And when I interviewed my daughter about it, when she was about 15 years old, she told me that the confidence that she was able to practice in tabletop role-playing games helped her tremendously growing up, because she felt confident in herself because she had practiced confidence and courage at the game table. And that practice allowed her, when
Yeah.
presented with scenarios in real life, to say, how do I want to handle this? I can handle it this way. And then that goes on to other things. My middle son is interested in martial arts. His passion for martial arts started because of gaming. My youngest son is a football player for his high school, and that passion for sports came out of a passion for gaming and being athletic in the game and wanting to be athletic in real life. So you have this life imitating art
Mm-hmm.
aspect of the game table. And parents, when you are playing with your children, you can kind of steer the ship a little bit,
Yeah.
right? You can help them out by showcasing values and behaviors that you, the parent, would like your child to emulate in real life by helping them choose those paths in the game. And
Yeah,
that's kind of
absolutely.
advanced advice, but
Yeah, but it's very
it's good.
true. One of a book that I read a year ago or so, it's called Theory of Fun. It's a book of game design, and talks about how games are really, if you look at it, they're like teaching tools. They're simulations of realities, even if it's like a fictional reality. But you're learning about how things work, how people react, about values, about what is important, what's not, type of stories, and we learn a lot from them. And also the things you talked about, curiosity, really instigates us, like we explore this a small sample of things, and like, oh, I want to go a little bit further on this. And I remember very distinctly, learning about how D&D was inspired by Lord of the Rings, for example. And I'd go there and I read Lord of the Rings, and for a long while, that's what fantasy looked like for me. Like, oh, fantasy is like Lord of the Rings and D&D. And when then I met Dungeon Crawl Classics in like 2012,
Yes.
and I really learned about the Appendix N. Of course, D&D had the Appendix N like years and years ago, but I wasn't even born when that happened. So I got into the Appendix N through DCC, and I read a bunch of fiction, learned a lot about what fantasy can be. My creativity took bounds, like leaps and bounds of what's possible. And also English, the thing, like this language we're using here and talking about, I mainly learned it because of games. I wanted to play games. I wanted to play. I remember my first English book was Vampire the Dark Ages, because we had Vampire the Masquerade here in Brazil, and it just got out Vampire the Dark Age, and it was like, oh, it's like Vampire with D&D. I want to get that. And I would get the book, go to like English courses and ask teachers what it's about. And back then, at that time, I was studying in like a military school here in Brazil. So I would like get punished for not cutting my hair or not like, making my shoes shine so much. So I'd have to go to school during the weekends. And normally kids that are, in like being punished there, have to either write an essay or study some book. I would take my RPG English books there, and then like, oh, you're studying. Oh, my English teacher said I should read this book, and like, okay, and I would stay there just reading role playing games, and yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
And
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 go ahead.
the what you were talking about, where it's educational. I have
Yeah.
on Raised on D&D, I've had the privilege. I'm up to 90 something episodes,
Wow.
and I have spoken with uh, with folks from all over the world. About I think I'm up to 17 different countries, and I've spoken with educators and psychiatrists, all kinds of people who use tabletop role playing games in ways I could never imagine, but they use them in the classroom. They use them to teach language. They use them to
Mm-hmm.
teach mathematics, and like we were talking about behavior and values, social interactions. They use them to help people with their trauma, to
Yeah.
use them in a psychological way to help people work through problems that they have mentally and
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, which I think is amazing. And it's just been incredible hearing from all of these folks who use tabletop role playing games in different ways that help people in so much. The folks who are listening at home who are haven't tried tabletop role playing games like me and Diego, you may not know this, but when we play tabletop role playing games, it's not it doesn't feel like a third person perspective. It doesn't feel like I'm moving this piece around a board and it's doing these things. Instead, we feel like we are in the action. When we play these games together, they are such memorable, powerfully emotional experiences that years later, Diego and I will reminisce about a game
Yeah.
session that happened years ago, and we don't talk about it in the third person. We don't say,
Mm-hmm.
remember when your character did this. We say, you remember when you did this and I did that and the monster did
Yeah.
this. And if we're in a crowded cafe and we're having this conversation, we get some weird looks, right? We're the weirdos
Mm.
because we're talking about slaying monsters with our swords and our
Yeah. Yeah.
magic spells together, and we're
Yeah.
not talking about it in the third person. We're talking about it in the first person. So, but that's how powerful these games can be, because it is memorable. It does make emotional connections between the players
Yeah.
and the game.
Experience and
Yes,
community and
it's a real,
collaboration.
it feels like a real experience. And that's another reason why I strongly recommend parents play with their children, because what it does is, and I'll tell you, if you have very young children, and now that mine are grown up a little bit more, they don't remember every game session you've played with them.
Mm-hmm.
Won't remember it in the details that you can remember it. What they remember is the time spent together. They remember the attention that you gave them, because when you're playing this game, you are all in, you are all focused on one another and on the game. And that focused attention has such a value to children and their development. So years from now, they may not remember, they'll remember playing the game. They may not remember the details of the game or what happened like you will as the parent. But what they will remember is my parent took the time to sit at a table for a couple hours with me and play games, and we laughed and we smiled and we had fun, and there were cheers and there were disappointments, and we shared that grand adventure together. And that it's hard to put a price tag or a value on
Oh
that
yeah.
experience.
Yeah. It's being present with one another and connecting and doing. We're creating something together, right?
Yes.
I don't know if it's me, but like the act of creation, it's something magical. If you can do this with others, you create these connections and meaning. and being able to do that with your family and doing that with your kids and teaching them how magical and valuable that can be. It's priceless, I think. You know. Yeah. And Nick, I always ask people here about maybe their creative rituals, their practice. And do you have anything like this for when you sit down to do your work, when you're going to record your episodes or going to write something? Do you have any kind of creative ritual that helps you get into the mood to really sit down and do the work?
Sure. Now, my creative rituals have developed over the ages. I have been a tabletop role playing gamer for 35 years. I've been a dungeon master for 30. Um, back in the day, I would sit down with stacks of books, some of them role playing books, but some of them history books or mythology books. And I would pour over these tomes like a fantasy wizard, taking notes like a scholar out of all of these places, and then trying to blend them together into an epic story adventure. With 35 years of that experience, it's a little more streamlined now. So, and also technology plays a big part in it. Instead of having stacks of books on my desk, having to pore over, instead now I'll use the internet. I'll use social media. I'll use headlines. I will look into. I'm very inspired by art, so I will look at art and I will randomly grab some art off the internet, and then I will take that art and try and formulate a story based on the images of characters or people or places and people. Um, and it's it's very I mentioned before, I kind of take all of the books and movies and cartoons and comic books that I've ever consumed, and I kind of blend them all up. I've also studied things like the hero's journey and mythology writing and things like that to kind of understand the stages of a story, the rising action, the climax, the resolution, things like that. And I use those things when creating adventures or modules or campaigns. And so there is a lot more, though things are streamlined because I'm not having to pull books off the shelf as frequently. I have a little bit more time, but I use those tried and true methods of writing stories. But as you mentioned, it's not my story. We're writing the story together. So I've got to leave it open ended enough for my players to interact with and to change. But yeah, so as far as being creative goes, I like some background music. I like some quiet left alone time, and I like to formulate those stories. But I really take inspiration from art. I love uh, digital art, traditional art. I love all of it, and when I take a look at it, if I see a picture of a person, I go, okay, how can I integrate them? What I start thinking, what is their personality like? What would this person sound like if I saw them in person? What would be something that they're interested in? And then what I do is I take that character that I've created and I cast them as a non-player character that my players will interact with in the story. And so those kind of things. And that, I guess, to some people, that should be pretty weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's a way of doing things, and you talked about using art as inspiration. Do you have any particular artist or school of art that you see yourself going back to and drawing ideas from, and always looking for inspiration?
I I like my even my fantasy and science fiction art. I like to have a bit of realisticness to it. So I don't care much for abstract art as much as I do great artists like Alex Ross and Larry Elmore. Those kind of artists are who I look at, and folks who imitate their type of art. Those are the kinds of art that I really are drawn to.
Yeah, but do you have any particular artist that you look for, or it's just generic? You go to Pinterest. Where do you look for your art? Where do you go and look for? Do you have books? How is that process? Where do you go hunt for this weird, wonderful art that you use?
So I love anthropology and archaeology. So what I will do is, depending on the theme of the tabletop role-playing game that I'm playing, or the theme of the location that my players are going to, their characters are going to visit, I will try and find a real-world human culture that will mimic that area, and then I will go to look for first photographs of their art, their artifacts from history. And then from there, that will lead me to looking at fine art or pop culture art. So yeah, I don't really look for a particular artist when I'm looking for inspiration, but I will do Pinterest searches or Google searches for things like, I'll give you a recent example. In one of the campaigns, so I am a dungeon master on startplaying.games is where folks can find me. And on startplaying.games, I've run several campaigns already. And in these campaigns, I like to immerse my players in the setting. I want them to feel like they're actually there, and see the world through their character's eyes. And one of the challenges that I had recently was the players were going on a great journey. Now, we weren't going to role play out the entire journey, where it's day 1, day 2, day 25, right? That kind of thing. So I was going to do what like in movies, it cuts from this scene and now we're in this scene and some time has passed, right? So I went ahead and I said, I don't want to say for the last 20 days you've just been walking through a forest. That's not very dynamic. It's not very exciting, right? It's easy little footnote. You walk through a forest, but I knew that I wanted there to be more to the story than that. Well, I started trying to think of different trees to describe the forest with, like walnut trees or ash trees, that kind of thing. Well, then I started to think, wait a minute, I don't know where those trees, do they grow next to each other or do they only grow in certain environments? I found myself on the United States government's website about climate change, their scientific study website. And what it did was it was showing different environments in the United States and different states, and it gave detailed descriptions of the forest and what kind of major plants were there, the terrain, and whether it was rocky or hilly or flat, and those kind of things. So it gave all this incredible detail. And so I took almost like a 50-mile straight line that the characters would have gone in, and I wrote down the descriptions of each of these environmental niches that they would have gone through. And at the beginning of the next game, I described their journey through these different environments and kind of some passive encounters that they had there. And so again, that was pretty weird because I didn't look in a D&D manual. I didn't look on Pinterest, but instead was on this government website that was designed for scientists to work on climate change studies. And instead, I'm using it to write a story for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, it's works pretty well. And, we can take all inspirations for all parts of our lives and see how we can adapt to this stuff, right? When you're playing like a urban crawl kind of campaign, we could very well take our local newspaper and see how would this event would have happened if it wasn't a fantasy city, So there's inspiration is everywhere, right? You know, I asked about maybe inspirations for your adventure, but I also want to ask you about the inspirations for the way you do your work, for the channel Raised on D&D, and how you portray yourself and work on your craft. And by that I mean, do you draw inspiration as kind of a mentor, role model, or for the way they do their work or the way they approach their craft or the community from any kind of artist or creator, whether they are from the tabletop RPG industry, or if they are like from actor or a writer or even a comedian or anything like this, that maybe you try to emulate in any way?
Sure. With podcasting, I've been podcasting now for 4 years. I break my show into seasons, and currently, as of this recording, I am in season 9. And my seasons usually last about 6 months, and it's 2 episodes per month. There was some inspiration. When I started podcasting, I was inspired to start doing it because I bought a microphone to help me with online gaming, to game with people from around the world. And at that time, I wasn't a professional dungeon master. I've actually been running tabletop role-playing games online since 2013. And only recently, for the past 3 years, have I been running games professionally, or in other words, for pay. So when it comes to podcasting, my brother is a radio host. His name is Pariah Burke. He has the Hard, Heavy, and Hair Show, which is a radio show about heavy metal music. And so I reached out to him and I said, listen, I've got this microphone and I'm thinking about doing a podcast. What do you think? And he says, well, I'll tell you what, make a tape, send it to me. I'll tell you if you're any good or not. So he was very helpful in that. And then I turned to my wife and I said, I'd like to do a podcast, but I'd like it to be positive. I want it to be uplifting. I want it to be about, I don't know what to do it about, because I have many different interests. And she said, well, you know what? You are passionate about purposeful parenting, and you're passionate about gaming. Why don't you combine those two things?
Yeah.
And initially, the show was just going to be me talking about being a dad and running games for my kids and what that was like, and tips and things like that. But then I thought, well, it'd be interesting to talk to my children, interview them, and ask them what being raised on D&D was like for them. And then at that time, a lot of the games for younger players were being developed by independent game designers. And I was friends with them on social media. And my wife made the suggestion, why don't you reach out to some of these game designers and see if they would be willing to come on your show and be interviewed about it. And what ended up happening was it snowballed away from me. And it ended up started being Tabletop Celebrity of the Week show, which was not its original intention. But what happened was, as the show started going, not only did people ask to be on the show, but then the tabletop role-playing game community is very tight-knit. That means that we're all very friendly with each other and everyone's very helpful and neighborly. And because of that, folks were like, they would do my show and then they would say, oh, you know who needs to be on your show is so and so. They're really cool and they like the things you like, and it would be great. And then they started referring friends to me and referring me to their friends and things like that. And so that's kind of how it's gone. And when I look for guests for my show, I look for creative individuals who are doing remarkable things with tabletop role-playing games. And so a lot of the folks that I interview, like I mentioned, are either using it for education or therapy. They're also creating community, which is another big thing, where they create gaming clubs either in their schools or in their towns for young people to have that connection through gaming, that sort of thing. So when it comes to creating, what I did was I took a sample of many different podcasts. Some of them were gaming related, others weren't. And I listened to these different podcasts, and I literally wrote down what I liked and what I didn't like. And obviously,
nice.
Not everybody.
You did research then.
I did the research, right? Yeah. And again, I modeled it after what I liked about those shows. So my show, of course, not everybody's going to like, but I wrote down, hey, I like this intro. I like how these people asked questions or how they featured their guests. I looked at time frames. So Raised on D&D podcast, it's really the demographic that listens to my show, and it's listened to in 69 different countries over 6 continents now. But the majority of folks who listen to the show are parents who either game with their children or are interested in gaming with their children. And so I took that into account. I wanted a show that parents could listen to. Parents, as you know, Diego, you're a dad too. We're busy, right? We got a lot of things going on. We don't have a lot of time. Yeah. Yes, our plates are over full. So I wanted to make it bite-sizable. I wanted it to be accessible to parents who are busy. And so I try to keep my episodes to around 30 minutes. So under 30 minutes or a little over. And what that,
we have
and
enough of this concern here.
Yes, you're right. And, but the idea was if it was a shorter episode, and I hate it sometimes because I will have a guest that I want to talk to
more
all afternoon. And I will tell my guests this. I'm like, you got to come back because we haven't even gotten the tip of the iceberg, and here we are having to cut it off at about I tell my guests about 50 minutes is the interview time, right? And what I'll do is I'll actually trim that down to 30 minutes or around 30 minutes so that my audience can listen to it. And then then there's the editing part, which I admire shows that don't have to do that.
It's really kind of a lazy decision, like I don't have time to edit this. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Editing is the bane of my existence. So, because I'll have a 50-minute interview, and it will take at least 2 hours or 3 to trim down. So it can be very time consuming. So, but so I do that, and I enjoy all the different aspects of podcasting and putting on the show. But I think what really keeps you doing it, keeps you going, is the listener feedback. I mean, that is so important for, I think, creators of any art form, but for podcasts especially. I have had people come up to me in public and tell me stories of gaming with their families after listening to the episodes of the show, and and how that's changed their family dynamic, how they've been able to put down the cell phones and the tablets and spend some quality time together, how gaming with their family led into conversations and hobbies that they would not have had if they hadn't taken the time to game together. And when you hear feedback like that, whether it's from emails from folks on the other side of the planet, or I'm bumping into coworkers who found my show, it's very heartwarming to me as a parent and a gamer, to know that they would not even have considered attempting this if it wasn't the encouragement of my guests that are featured on the show. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, having someone take, as you said, as a parent, as adults, you're always very busy, and having someone take some time out of their life to stop and write something about your show or give you some feedback or write a review of your show, it's like, wow, oh my God, thank you so much, as you said, and one of the main things for me for doing this is the opportunity to sit down with you, with other creators, and talk about the stuff that we love, right? And it's kind of my therapy in a way, I sit down every week. I have this chance to talk to other creator. And as you said, like for me, role models of podcasts, I did kind of the same thing. I didn't take notes, but I have this kind of podcast that I love. This one is really, if you read like the text I sent with the invite, is really inspired by a comedian's podcast. But I always, make it my own in my own way. But it's like, I love this book, like still like an artist. So you can take inspiration. You don't need to just look at your field for inspiration, right? We can look everywhere. And I'm a little bit obsessed with games and comedy. So I always, I've watched comedy masterclass with Steve Martin on masterclass. And I was like watching this, like, oh, that I can use in gaming this and this way. Oh, that I can apply to tabletop RPG design in this and this way, because there's always that curiosity you talked about, that RPG kind of still in us. We learn how to look at other things and see what we can learn from that and apply to our games, right? It's like the problem solving that kind of gaming in sense encourages to. So I love how you talked about this, how you look at various parts to different aspects of this and make something your own, and you are very thoughtful about it. And I'm kind of totally opposite. I like really long conversations, so we can get deep into some topic and it gets really personal and no editing. I want to be very, very raw, and I'm very lazy too, because as I said, I have a kid, I have a day job, I want to write my games, so I either edit this to be very sharp or do other stuff. So yeah, it's very objective. So yeah. Hello, wonderful weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira again, and today I'd like to talk to you about one of my favorite games, a game that I created, and if you listen to the podcast, I love dinosaurs, and it's called Primal Quest. It is a weird stone and sorcery adventure game. It's a NSR game, which is this game that caters to the old school style of play, but has more modern and more cinematic gameplay adapted to our modern sensibilities. It has adventure with dinosaurs, ancient civilizations, spirity, sorcery, aliens, elder gods, and much, much more. It's very pulpy. It has, a complete rule set, a mini hex scroll, an adventure introductory adventure. You can find it at Exalted Funeral, itch.io, Drive-Thru RPG, and your best local game store. And we're releasing more and more stuff for it, so stay tuned and play Primal Quest. So let's get back to the weird with our chat. Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit maybe about the weirdest game you ever played, or a very weird game you played recently that either maybe made an impression on you or made an impression on your kids, with how they thought, like, wow, this is very different and I like this, or I don't like that, or anything like this?
So I'll answer this in two parts then. The weirdest game I have ever played was a game called Paranoia. Paranoia is an old 80s game. It takes place in a
Oh, they have
dystopia.
it now. They have a new edition now.
Oh,
Yeah.
do they have a new edition?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Mongoose
wonderful.
Publishing. They publish it now. Yeah.
They
They
made
want to.
made a updated one, huh?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so Paranoia is a dystopian setting, and you are kind of trapped in this AI controlled city, and people are put into a caste system wearing different colored jumpsuits, and it restricts what you're allowed to do in that society, where you're allowed to go, what job you can have. So it's like a dystopian novel, and you as the characters are trying to escape. And as you're trying to escape, the AI controlled city is trying to stop you with uh, uh, gun turrets and security guards and all kinds of things. So Paranoia is if you enjoy dystopian novels
Yeah.
and kind of what was the what was that show on Netflix, the Squid Games. If you enjoy those kind of things where you have these puzzles that you have to get through to try to escape, Paranoia is the game for you. So that was one of the I would say weirdest
Yeah.
experiences in tabletop role playing games I had. And in that game, because it is so fatal, your characters die very frequently. You would actually have a stack of character sheets, and so as your character would die, you could pull another one and be a new character and keep going. So
You have
that
clones too, right? Like you can.
Oh yeah, I think you do have clones. Like you keep waking up, right? Like because you're not escaping that way either. So yeah, so they have all those options. Um, so keeping that in mind, a fun game that I love. It's just a funny little game. It's called Kobolds Ate My Baby,
Yeah.
and by Ninth Level Games. And this is a very fun game because it has all these cool aspects to it. Like if you mention the king of the kobolds, then everyone has to yell out "All hail King Torg." And if you're the last one to say "All hail King Torg," then something bad happens to your character, and those kind of things. So it's got these silly little aspects to it. Well, my children came to me one day and they said, "Dad, our heroes never die in your tabletop role playing games." And I said, "Oh, well, that's because you guys roll so well and you do teamwork so good." And they went, "No, no, 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 no. We think that you're fudging the dice and our characters never get to die, so you can go on to the next story with our heroes." And they're not they weren't wrong. But I wasn't trying to slay their heroes, but they wanted a
Mm-hmm.
game where their heroes were more fragile and there was a greater chance of them having to pull another character from the stack. So I thought of Paranoia, but then I thought of Kobolds Ate My Baby. And Kobolds Ate My Baby, you play little kobolds, and as you might guess, they're trying to steal a baby from the human village to feed to their king. And so these little fuzzy goblin like kobolds are running around a village, and they're very fragile. So they can die from things like the family dog. They can get hit by frying pans by the peasant woman who doesn't want her baby stolen. Adventurers could be in the village and attack the kobolds. So the characters that you play are the kobolds. And I introduced this game to my children. My children went into the village. Some of them were slain, and they actually stole the human baby and got away. So that was one of the weirdest games that I got to play with my family because the premise is kind of dark and
Yeah.
and them getting to play little monsters versus heroes was a change of pace for them.
Yeah. And did they tell you about anything? How they liked it? How they want to try other different stuff or other different perspectives? Or was it like, oh, just was fun? Or did you had any talk about this? How strange
Well,
it was, or no?
we they laughed the whole game, even when their kobolds were squished, or a cow fell on them, whatever happened. And it made for an afternoon of a lot of laughs and fun and just kind of lightheartedness. And when it was even years after we've played that game, they bring it up from time to time about how much fun it was, how much they enjoyed that, how silly it was, and how it was interesting to see uh,
The other
tabletop role
side.
playing
Yeah.
games from the other side being the bad
Yeah.
guys and that sort of thing. And that actually, I think that actually inspired my middle child to ask for a villain focused role playing game where we played Dungeons and Dragons, and instead of being heroes, they were in fact had created villains, and that was a great experience because I in the game I knew what would get them. I went ahead and I pitted their villain characters against their long-term heroes that they had been playing in a campaign. So I took their heroes and I
Wow.
threw them against their villains, and it was fun because for them it was weird because they were attacking their alter egos, and for some of them it was very disheartening. In fact, one of the main questions that I was asked was, is this canon, or is this storyline going to affect our other storylines? So they wanted to make sure that them killing the heroes in this adventure wasn't actually killing their heroes in all the storylines. And I had to
Mm.
reassure them, no, it's not. So they
It's
had a
an
great
alternate
time.
dimension. Yeah.
Yes, alternate storyline, alternate timeline, and they really, really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Awesome. Uh, Nick, I love asking, creators, people who make their things, you make your podcast, you design your games, if they can identify maybe any sort of strength or maybe advantage, something that you are confident that you have, that you know that maybe helped you through the process to do what you do. Do you identify anything like this in you that you think as an asset to your work, your craft?
Mm, give give me the question one more time. I'm trying to
It's
answer it for
it's
you.
about if you identify your any characteristics of yours, maybe a strength. It's like a talent in an RPG. If you had a character sheet, you had a feat that helps you do what you do. What would that feat be?
Okay, yes, I definitely can answer that way. So I have always been so part of my uh tragic backstory is uh I I was uh when I was very young, I would make up stories, and I didn't have a creative outlet for it. I tried my hand at writing when I was young, um, but I had a reading disability, which uh, which hindered me from becoming a writer at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So I would make up all these stories, and I would have a hard time expressing them through art. And what would end up happening is I would end up telling people stories that weren't true. And I was probably about 10, 11 years old, and I'm friends with kids in the neighborhood, and I'm telling tall tales, and children at that age are very keen on what's true and what isn't. And when I was caught in some of my lies, people didn't want to be my friend because they didn't know whether what I was saying was true or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a vow that if I lied about something, I would go out and actually do it. So if I said I did something dangerous or something daredevil like, and I told that lie, I would be committed to have to go do that daredevil stunt so that it was true. Another example would be we were in school and there was a bully, and I would say, well, I told that bully off, and I told him this and I told him that, and he better back down. And I intimidated the bully and all these things. And people would shake their head and say, no, you didn't really do that. Or they'd go, ooh, ah. Well, then I'd walk away and I'd go, you know what? I didn't really do that. That was a lie. So I'm going to go do that right now. And I'd walk up to the bully and I'd start to say the things that I said. And the bully's reaction would be so much better than what I imagined that I ran back to my friends and I would go, you're not going to believe this. I just said this to the bully. And they said, wait. You already told us this story. And I said, yes, but that was a lie. So then I went and actually did it. And it was way better than what I told you. So now I'm excited and I'm telling you what really happened. That was how I combated an ability or a disability, which would have led me down the road to be a compulsive liar. But because of all of the acting and the movies and the films and things that I had watched, I had become a very good oral performer. I was able to speak well. I was able to convey emotion well, things like that. And so because that became a skill or a feat of mine, that I was an
Storyteller,
expert
right?
at, yes, I became the storyteller. And because I became the storyteller, I was able to use that ability for other things, which led to education. Like I was able to teach people in such a way that I could convey history or things from other cultures in a way that was relatable to people and could help them understand the emotion behind just kind of dry history stories and things like that. So if I had a superpower, if I had a special ability, it would be that my way of my early on being a liar turned me into a great storyteller, and then to combat lying and to help people gain trust in me, I became daring and I became courageous because I had to do the fantastical things that I lied about, to the point where I didn't have to tell the lie first anymore. I would just go and do fantastical things, and then I would tell people about it. So much so that when I was in college, some friends of mine, we had grown up together. And one of my friends had a younger brother, and we were in a situation that was very dangerous, and was very violent. And we were able to kind of get out of the situation unharmed.
Wow.
And as we were driving away from this very dangerous situation, he turns to me, the younger brother of one of my friends. He turns to me and he says, you know, all my life, my brother has told me what we call Nick stories, or stories about things Nick has done. And I didn't believe him. I went, you're pulling my leg. He didn't do that. He didn't say that. He didn't put himself in that situation or put you in that situation. And you didn't get out like a movie. And he says, and here I am in a Nick story for the very first time, and
Wow.
I can't believe it happened. And all of that because I didn't want to be a liar anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Now I want to ask maybe a Nick story so we can hear one. And I'm curious about if you continue to seek this very fantastical and exciting experience to share it with others in stories, or is just something you do as a younger and now you seek other kind of weird experiences?
So, yeah. So I'm older now and calmed down, and now I don't have as many Nick stories as I used to. However, I am what's called a first responder. And so I am often in dangerous situations with that have
Yeah.
potentials for violence and all kinds of
Hmm.
things, and maybe some of those early adventures have led me to this career. So I still have a little bit of
A lot of
excitement.
tell, yeah, lots to
Yeah,
tell for
a
sure. Yeah.
lot of excitement from time to time. So, but as far as being like an adrenaline enthusiast, the days of bungee jumping and exploring abandoned buildings and
Yeah.
hiking through uh, 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 wildernesses, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Those days are further behind me than they are in front of me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But you can still tell those stories, right? To your kids. Do you think about do you think those experiences is important? Do you think being courageous and daring is something important? And do you try to instill that in your kids too?
yes, uh, one of the things that uh, being courageous and daring is a value, but my family ties that very strongly to our faith. So our religious convictions is intertwined with that courage and daring and heroism, and because of that, raising our children with values like truthfulness and bravery and empathy and defending the weak, those kind of things that has greatly influenced them, I think, growing up. And it went right along with our tabletop role playing games because we were able to integrate that into our art, to help teach those lessons and those values that would help them moving forward into adulthood. Because you can't always we can't always slay the dragon with a sword, or
Yeah.
we can't always clear out that cave of kobolds or bugbears with strength of arms.
Yeah.
But courage against overwhelming odds was something that we really tried to drive home in that. So yeah, I think it's been an integral part of my life and my children's.
Awesome. Yeah. And we are almost an hour and a half in the episode, and you mentioned about religion and spirituality. And it's always something I ask people here about how does that affect your life, and how does that help you in the difficult moments? Do you have any practice that you took from religion that helps you guide in your everyday life in difficult moments? And does any of this uh, pass through your craft and your work?
Absolutely, absolutely. So uh, let me start by saying that I am a Roman Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and to most people, especially from countries that are predominantly Catholic. That's not
Yeah,
very,
here.
it may
Yeah.
not be surprising.
I was raised Catholic. Yeah.
Okay, so when I
Went
say
to
that,
Catholic school.
okay, so it was
Yeah.
that military school you went to, polishing your
No,
boots.
it was before the military school until I was like in the 4th grade, which now I think is the 5th grade, and the 6th
Mhm.
grade was the 5th then. So I was until the 5th grade in a Catholic school, and then I made an exam to pass to the military school. So yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so in Catholic countries, me saying I'm Roman Catholic sounds like, well, you're just like everybody else. But here in
But yeah.
America, we're our diversity in faiths is very very prominent. In my
Mm-hmm.
town alone, there are probably I would say as many as 50 different churches in my hometown here. And of those 50 churches, they probably belong to 30 or about 30 different varieties of Christianity. So when I tell people I'm Roman Catholic here, it can be a little surprising because there are so many different types of Christians here. But in Roman Catholicism, um, not only do you have the virtues that most people are familiar with, but also we have a greater understanding of suffering and the purpose of suffering. So, and how to endure suffering. There are different varieties of Christianity that teach things like, well, if God likes you, everything in your life will work out. Okay. And Roman Catholicism does not teach that, because we know not only from examples of Jesus Christ himself going through suffering, but also through Christians throughout the centuries who have endured hardship, oppression, even to the point of torture and death. That level of suffering helps me as a individual Christian living in the modern world to be able to accept and endure the much lighter oppression that we're accustomed to in the modern world, on this, at least in this hemisphere. So,
Mm.
but that understanding of, hey, life is hard, and things are not going to go your way, and it is going to be a struggle, and things are going to be tough, and you have to be courageous, and you have to endure, um, and you have to have hope. Those things, which is intricate to my faith,
And
has
do the
helped.
work for that, right?
And you
And
have
keep
right,
going.
and
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
to keep pushing forward, and you have to a phrase that we use in my household is, you have to hold the line, and that's a military phrase of,
Mm-hmm.
you can't let the troubles of your life impede on your values and on your
Mm-hmm.
beliefs.
Yeah.
And so holding the line, enduring, pushing forward, and not just, and another thing is, folks that aren't familiar with this type of philosophy, they don't understand that we're not just taking the suffering. We're not just enduring the suffering. We're not enjoying the suffering. Um,
You're making
we're
it meaningful, right?
It's
It's
meaningful,
yeah.
absolutely. It's for a purpose. It's making
Yeah.
me better, and I'm taking this suffering that maybe is beyond my control. There's nothing I can do about it. There's no way that I can
Yeah.
change it, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to redirect it to help
Mm-hmm.
the world. I'm gonna endure that suffering. I'm gonna take it on, like Christ took on the sins of the world, and I'm gonna offer it up. I give it over to Jesus, and I say, "Listen, God, I can't do anything with all this, with all these things that are coming at me from the media, from work, from bills, from the
Mm-hmm.
price of food." I can't do anything about those things. I'll do whatever I can do about those things, but the parts that I can't do anything about, I
Yeah.
just have to
You
hand
let
over
go. Yeah.
and say, I, I, I trust in you to get me
Yeah.
through this. And that's difficult for some people, especially people who struggle with faith. It's difficult for us Christians who don't struggle
Yeah.
with faith, because there are days when you shake your head and you say, how much more do I have to endure? And I think a
Yeah.
benefit of Roman Catholicism is that when I say how much more can I endure, I can not only look to Jesus, which people have a hard time doing because they're like, well, he was the son of God. He lived 2,000 years ago. He lived in, he lived in the Middle East. He's very different from me. But I can look to Christians who lived 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, who lived in time periods with cars and telephones and photographs. And I can look at those people and they lived heroically virtuous lives. And I can look at them and say, you know what? They had a car, they had a job, they had photographs, they had the internet, and yet somehow they found the faith and the strength and the love and the hope that it took to be virtuous, even in a world that was opposing to those values and those virtues. And so I can look to those role models for encouragement to
Mm-hmm.
help me on my path
Yeah.
through life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, I was rated Catholic. I'm not anymore. I'm kind of atheist, but I do follow, which is kind of I try to practice because of my anxiety and stuff. Stoicism. I studied that a lot, and I know it kind of blew up at the same time as Christianity. You know, Catholicism was being born, and they have a lot of similarities about these things about letting go of the things you can control, of enduring suffering, but doing your best, making that suffer meaningful in a way. And I love when these very different philosophies, it can be a philosophy, it can be a religion, it can be some kind of spirituality. They very often arriving in very simple and mystical teachings, about suffering. Like, Buddhism says that life is suffering, but it's worth figuring out what you're suffering for and figuring out what is really worth suffering for, right? Is it worth suffering for fame, for money, or is it worth suffering for having deep connections with your family and then working hard for this, for creating something meaningful that will have some meaningful impact in someone else's life, how they see the world, how they feel about themselves. So it's very is that you said, like, suffering is everywhere. So you have to figure out, okay, if I have to suffer, because we will, right? What is it worth suffering for? What do I will put myself on the line, and then hold the line, you know. This is something I'm willing to suffer for, so I'm, holding the line here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very valuable thing to learn. Yeah, and Nick, talking about other things about your life or personal life, we talk about weird experiences, and I'm always, curious about if you had experienced something maybe supernatural, something weird. Like, did you had any episodes and you fell into a trance, maybe a deep prayer or something that made you transcending other, maybe outer states of awareness? It's going to be through prayer, to meditation, to hypnosis, maybe out of body experience. Have you ever experienced any weird and supernatural thing with yourself, with your body, with your
Sure.
consciousness?
Oh, absolutely. I have several experiences that people would find weird. Another thing, again, with my faith, with Roman Catholicism, which is, other Christianities, they try to deny the existence of things like ghosts and angels and demons and things like that, and they don't accept the reality of things that are unseen. But Roman Catholicism doesn't. So I have had encounters throughout my life with supernatural things, miraculous things that have happened. And I have one experience with a cryptid here. I live in Central Florida in the United States, and we have a huge nature preserve where we have an area where people are not allowed to build houses or develop the land or cultivate the land. It is preserved to keep almost like a time capsule for that land. And this particular place is called the Green Swamp. It's not a very creative name, but it's called the Green Swamp Preserve in Central Florida. And this would have been 26 years ago.
Oh.
My wife, who was then my fiance, and I were driving through the Green Swamp. Now, folks who are familiar with this area know that there is one road that cuts the Green Swamp into a west and a east area. But the road is straight. It doesn't wind through the swamp. It is a straight road, and it is very long. It is at least, I want to say, maybe, I might be wrong about this, but I want to say it's about 10 miles in a straight line, cutting through the middle of the swamp. So one night we're driving home, and it has to be around 9 to 9:30 p.m. At night, and it's during the summertime, so the sun has only gone down about 7:45, 8 p.m. maybe. And we're driving along, and at the southern end of this road, after driving miles and miles and miles through the darkness, there's no lights on the side of the road. There's only little reflectors down the road, down the center of the road. And I think 26 years ago, there wasn't even little reflectors. It was just painted lines and a straight shot into the darkness with trees on either side. And you had to drive carefully because deer and things like that could jump across the road, or alligators could be sunning themselves on the hot pavement. And if you hit an alligator with your car, you're going to do more damage to your car than to the alligator. Okay. So there's some natural dangers. At the southern end of the road, it does curve a little bit, and then you see the street lamps of the main road that the Green Swamp dead ends into. About, I would say, 50 yards ahead of us, silhouetted by the street lamps that were still another maybe half a mile away, lumbers across the road a bipedal, tall, 7 to 8 feet tall, hairy humanoid. Which at the time, we didn't even know that Florida had any kind of variety of Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, as we call it in North America. But the outline of this creature was that of a traditional Bigfoot or Yeti that you would see in media. And it crossed across the road, and what was remarkable was it disappeared into the forest, and I stopped the car because we were approaching it, and I stopped the car, and I turned to my fiance, and before I could say anything, she goes, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Hold up, what did you see?" Because I have, 20 years of science fiction and role-playing games bouncing around in my head. So what did you see? And she said, I just saw Bigfoot cross the street. I said, I saw Bigfoot as well. Well, then we thought that was the weirdest thing that it, could have happened to us on this trip. And then I went home and did research and found out that the Florida variety of Sasquatch or Bigfoot is called the swamp ape. So this is Florida, or I'm sorry, the stink ape, I believe is what it's called, is the Florida equivalent of Bigfoot. And the reason it's called the stink ape is because it smells so incredibly bad. And if you get near it, or it gets near you, you smell it before you see it or hear it. We were in the car. We were still about 50 yards away. We might have been downwind. We didn't smell the stink ape, but we did most definitely see a Bigfoot-like creature cross the road. And that was my only experience with a cryptid. But it was remarkable. And so if you do research on it, there's all kinds of eyewitness sightings. The Green Swamp is a predominant area because, again, it is a nature preserve. So it is unspoiled, natural Florida wetlands. And so yeah, that was a pretty weird experience. And I've only told that tale a couple of times.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for telling it here too. It's kind of inspiring and maybe makes you think of weird things. You do you draw from that experience to your games too sometimes?
So one of the games that I was paid to recently create and run was I was challenged by a player who said, I want to introduce tabletop role-playing games to my friends, but I don't think that they could sit through a standard 4-hour session. Is it possible that you could create a D&D adventure that only lasted 2 hours? And I thought about it and I went, well, 2 hours is kind of tight. I said, you know what? I think I can do it in 2.5 hours. Let me create an adventure and run it for you and your friends. So I create this 2.5 hour adventure, and I have the D&D heroes meet up with an old druid in the forest, and he asks for their help with a horrific, unnatural beast that has come to his forest, and he's disrupted the natural order of things. It doesn't have a predator. It's a top predator, but it doesn't have a specific prey. So it starts eating everything. It doesn't fit into the ecosystem. It's destroying the forest. And so the heroes have to find it and destroy it. Well, the druid doesn't tell them what the monster is. Like, he doesn't name it. He just says it's a great evil. It's unnatural. Doesn't fit into the natural order of things. So as the players are going through this adventure, I have different. I approach this adventure in a different way than I would normally. I took inspiration from that experience, seeing the shadowed outline of the Bigfoot crossing the road. I took that, and then I also borrowed from older 80s and 70s horror movies. And so what I did was, to build tension in that adventure, the players, the characters, were going through the forest, and animals would stampede. So you'd have a stampede of animals of different types all together. So you'd have birds and deer and boars and bears all running in the same direction together as a big group,
Wow, yeah.
stampeding. because whatever it was they were running away from, and that built tension because the heroes didn't know what the monster was. Then later on, they find a kind of like centaur creature caught in a trap, and the centaur creature tells them, it's here, the monster's here, it's setting traps, it's devouring, I've got to get away, help me. And that tension starts to build because the heroes are like, well, where is it? And he says it's nearby, it's going to come soon, we got to get out of here. So it's building the tension. Then they see a lumbering shadow moving through the underbrush, and they can only get kind of a vague silhouette that it's huge, that it's muscular, that it's hulking. And then eventually the players and the monster collide, and they find out that it's a troll. If I said to D&D players, you're going after a troll, there's a troll in the woods, you're going to have to fight a troll, the players would remember from the game, oh, trolls, you need fire to defeat it, or you need acid to defeat it. So I'm going to equip fire, or I'm going to light a torch, or I'm going to have acid on my hero so that we can fight this troll. And it takes a lot of the fear and the excitement out of the game. And so to avoid that, I didn't name the monster. And when they came face to face with the troll, some of the players who had never played before were like, oh, a troll? Oh no. And some of the players who had played before went, oh, it's just a troll. But it wasn't just a troll, because now they were toe to toe with it. They weren't prepared. They didn't have any fire. They didn't have any acid. They didn't have any of these things. And here was this troll suddenly in their face, bursting forth from the underbrush and trying to devour them. And so it made for that terror aspect. And I was able to draw from both that real life experience and from other fiction of a horror genre.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Stealing from ourselves is always a great thing. And Nick, we're almost to an hour and 50, and now we're going to the final questions, which are kind of a rapid fire. It's like just answer the first thing you think about. It's really whimsical questions, like if you had in our own world you stumbled upon a wish spell, what would you wish for? And why?
I would wish to be able to speak and understand all languages.
Why?
Because I am a typical American with only one language in my repertoire, and I think it is. I'm also tone deaf, so I cannot hear subtle things in tone, and I also can't tell when I'm making adjustments in the tone. So I have a hard time with languages because I can't pick up foreign languages easily. So I feel like that's a superpower, being able to speak different languages, and I would wish to be able to speak and understand people in all tongues. I think that would be incredible.
Yeah. And do you ever thought about doing studying anything? Do you ever try Duolingo? I tried Spanish for a while, but it's like I always forget to do it, and then spend 3 weeks receiving emails from Duolingo just pestering about to do it, and I get angry. I'm stop sending me emails. I'm not gonna do it anymore, and it's kind of worse. I don't know.
Unfortunately, though, because I can't catch those subtle differences, my wife, very, very good at language. She speaks French and is learning Spanish, and speaks English. And my middle son is very, very attuned to different changes in sound, and he can mimic all kinds of languages. If he learns, he can say it just like it's spoken, roll the tongue, everything. And unfortunately, I do not have those abilities. So I might be able to do it, but it would be a Herculean effort.
Yeah. Well, I get it. And the other question is, if you could live in any fictional weird world or universe out there, from games, from literature, from movies, from comics, anywhere, where would you live? What world would you live on? And who would you be in that universe?
Well, that's a really good question. When I was younger, I had a very easy answer for this. I would live in a comic book called ElfQuest on the world of Two Moons, and have I would have been a person who negotiated peace between the different intelligent races of that world. So that's what I would have answered when I was younger. But probably now, I think I would like a futuristic, more peaceful existence, like maybe Star Trek. And I wouldn't be on one of the ships. I'd be on one of the like secure home worlds with a food
Oh, yeah.
replicator.
Yeah, good choice. And the other way around, if you could take anything from this weird, fantastical world and make that thing real in our own world, what would you choose to make it real, and why? And that thing can be, an individual, an entity, a faction, a power source, a location, an object, any one specific element.
I think I think
Hard to choose, right?
it
Just
is
the
hard
first
to,
thing.
it is
Yeah,
hard
just
to
the
choose.
first thing that comes to your mind. I don't know.
The
Mine is
first
always
thing
the force. Always the force. Like the first
the
thing.
first
the
thing that
force.
pops to mind is is Superman. I think our world could benefit from a benevolent Clark Kent Superman, who comes in and is a paragon of virtue and can help us find a peace. I think if I could bring
That's very
anything from
Catholic
I think
thing, yeah.
if I could pick something from fiction to bring to our world, it would be Superman.
Yeah. And Nick, our last question is: do you remember the last time you felt really happy? Just grateful for being here and being alive? And if you do, can you share with us what is that you were doing and when that happened?
Well, you know what? I've been described as an individual who goes through life like a man with a flower crown parading, skipping through a meadow. So I'm kind of, when it comes to joy, people often say, you're very joyful. So being happy is pretty often. As a specific
I don't
moment.
know, this very feeling of gratefulness, for having the chance and the opportunity for being here and having the experiences and, really stopping to appreciate what you have, because it's very easy for us to get into negative space and focus on the things that went wrong.
I do have a moment. When I was 13 years old, I had the privilege of going to space camp, which, for those of you who are not familiar with it, space camp is where young people go to NASA and learn to be astronauts for a week. And that was a very wonderful experience when I was 13. I recently took my children to Kennedy Space Center, to NASA in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and we went back. And I want to say that we went recently, but the first time I had been back in almost 30 years was in 2021, I think. And we went to the Kennedy Space Center, and they have the USS Atlantis in the museum, like the actual space shuttle is in the museum. Like you are within feet of it, and it is hanging in the museum, and I became very emotional, and I started to cry. And my children asked me what was wrong, and I said, nothing's wrong. I said, I haven't been here in over 30 years. And this space shuttle was the embodiment of space travel, of the new horizon. And just to be in the room with it, just to have finally returned to NASA all these years later was a very moving and beautiful experience for me. And to be able to share that with my children, I was very grateful.
Sounds amazing. Yeah. So, Nick, thank you so much for coming here and sharing, this experience, your wisdom, things you learned, things you went through. And it was really inspiring and very, I learned a lot. So thank you very much for doing this and being here. Do you have any last messages to give to the wonderful weirdos out there that are still listening to us?
Yes. Stay weird, stay curious. Whether you're looking into the natural world or history or the future. And if you have the opportunity, visit raisondnd.com and listen to some of the episodes. What's nice about my episodes are it's not a series. So you just go through and you find a guest that you're interested in or a topic that you're interested in, and you can listen. And I encourage you to play games with your children, especially tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Great message. Thank you very much. And where can people, wherever the viewers can find you out there before we go out?
Sure. So Raised on D&D has presence on Instagram, TikTok, of course, Twitter and Threads, and Facebook. But you can also go to raisedondnd.com and you can find us on all our socials. We have a fans group that gets kind of behind the scenes information, gets first looks at new things coming out. We do giveaways, and if you're part of that Facebook fans group, you get kind of a head start on the giveaways, things like that. So definitely check us out on all the social medias. And of course, anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find Raised on D&D.
Awesome. Yeah. Can you take us out saying the catchphrase of the show? Keep it weird, everybody.
I'm Nick Cardarelli with Raised on D&D. Keep it weird, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.